many people would agree. But LinkedIn went from being a place where I would randomly check messages every 3 months and then just apologize for not getting back to people. But in the last year or so, it seems to be, I guess people are a little bit tired of X or Twitter or Facebook's just content spam now. And so when we put out a prototype of our product, I just put out a LinkedIn post and I got 10,000 shares and we had 30 people sign up off of one post. So I think some of the founder profile help, which is again a bit of an unfair advantage when starting second time around. I think that's going to play a pretty important role. Selling is a really important part of taking our product to market. It's a pretty consultative process and you can find your ICP fairly quickly if you're selling directly to accountants. It can be relatively slow. Selling is really everything. You're always selling it. You're always thinking about who your customer is, evangelizing it. And it's hard work because you believe in it and you really care about it, but you're going to take a lot of rejection.
Hey, so good to see you, man. Welcome to the show.
Yeah, nice to see you too, Ricky. How you going?
Good. Hey, Nick, take us back to your early years. Not so early, but your professional years. How did you get into tech? What brought you into Vend and Xero and everything else?
Yeah, good question. I got into tech because I went to university to become a physiotherapist and I just didn't want to be a doctor and I didn't want to be a banker like my old man. So I picked something in the middle. But this is the late 90s and I was living in the UK and I had friends that were in software businesses and they were earning silly dollars per hour. And I was like, I think I'm in the wrong industry. And at the time, all I wanted to do was play music. So music was my passion when I was a teenager and I went to the UK to play in bands. And if you wanted to make music and record music back then, you had to buy the early Windows computers and put software on them and rip them apart and put hardware boxes in. And I found myself spending more time fixing computers than fixing people. And I was like, well, maybe I can get paid better for fixing computers. And also, if the computers don't work, you can always buy a new one. Whereas with a person, that's hard to do. And so I got into IT through music, through doing audio engineering. I got a job on a help desk for a point of sale company in Scotland in 99. And then I just kept it up. I managed to squeak a living as a musician for a few years with a band in Edinburgh. This is early days of MySpace. I put a website using Dreamweaver and a bunch of layers. And I published it using FTP. And we did a tour of Europe once and a small tour, pubs, and it wasn't stadiums or anything, but we had a MySpace page. And then one day people started showing up at gigs. How did you hear about it? We heard about it through MySpace. And so for me, the penny dropped then around how the internet and how technology could be a vehicle to reach people rather than just the sort of technical aspect that I've been working on. And so while I continued to work on the tech, while I was in the band, maybe because I'm this doesn't work out, a big effective. But then I realized I'm not really a software engineer. I'm not great at coding, but I was really fascinated by how mediums like social media, you could reach people and you could engage with people online. This is 2005, very early on. And so that became the starting point for my proper career when I decided to leave the band, move in with my wife in London and eventually move home. And I was doing a bit of that when I moved back to New Zealand, freelance and doing a bit of web development, design, working for a PR agency, just helping them help clients understand what social media means. And through all of that, I was using Xero because I was a contractor and I'd be put onto Xero by my brother who was using it in his retail shop. And I tried different forms of accounting software, cash flow. I filed my own taxes the first year. The second year, I was like, this is going to get me audited. I think I need an accountant and I need proper software. And I started using Xero. It was like a light bulb. The second time where it was so easy, it was business software that was user-friendly. I was like, this is really cool. And they're based in New Zealand. There's something happening here. And I'm interested to work for them, but all the interesting jobs are in Wellington. It's cold and windy. I live in Auckland. I just moved back to the UK. I moved away from the cold and the wind. And weirdly, through being on the Xero mailing list, one day I got an email saying, hey, we've got an add-on store and we've got this new point of sale add-on called Vend, which plugs in with Xero. And I was like, interesting. I just set up a retail shop for my brother. Fence it was painful. And I just reached out to the team. I said, I think this is really cool. I think you're going to do for retail what Xero is doing for accounting software. Can I come and talk to you about it? And that was the beginning of my journey with Vend, which was the beginning of my real career in technology, after all that freelancing and building websites for bands.
So you already done a bit of marketing. You prospected yourself into a job by sounds of it. So
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah. I guess I had a bunch of transferable skills. My first job was on a point of sale help desk. I'm like, I could do that in my sleep. But what I really love is the brand, reaching customers. And maybe if I could take that off your plate, this is when it was just born at the time. I said, if I can take all that stuff off your plate, can you just keep writing code? And he said, yeah, that sounds good. Let's give it a go for a few months and see where we get to.
So you were the first ever employee at Vend?
Yeah. The boy wasn't even employed at that point. I think he was working part-time on it. And I worked on part-time on it too. It's like early 2011. Pretty quickly, it became pretty consuming for even two people part-time. And so it was probably 3 or 4 months after that where we were like, oh, we better take this a bit seriously and raise a bit of cash and build out the team.
So mate, looking back at that, 2011, obviously so much has changed, AI and all the other bits and pieces that have come in. We can come back to that. But what lessons did you learn early on at Vend that are still applicable to date as you build out your new startup?
I think that you got to do a bit of everything and you've just got to hustle it, right? There's not really much point being super focused at that stage of a business. The only thing that matters is getting people to use your product, then understanding their needs and then meeting them, which will enable you to get more people to use it. And if that means that you're on a sales call, 1 hour, you're on dealing with running a support ticket, the next, you're submitting a blog post, the next, you just do it. You do whatever it takes, keep the boat moving forward. And I think that's true at any early stage of a startup. You've got to be a bit scrappy. You've got to have people the mindset as founders or people in the early team who are prepared to be scrappy and roll the sleeves up and do a little bit of everything. And you've got to really understand the customer in space, right? You've got to really believe in it. And so I think those things were really important back then. I was not great at software coding. I was in the virtual machine. I was writing a bit of code. Vaughan was writing a lot of the code, but he would also answer the more complicated support tickets. So there's definitely a blurring of the lines between all those things. And you just keep trying things until you find things that work a little bit better. And so for us, we were just trying a lot of different stuff to grow the product, to build features. We were in the Xero app store and that was working for leads. We felt like there was an opportunity to do similar with Shopify. So we released the Shopify integration and that started to grow leads as well. But we also had other integrations that didn't work. From a marketing perspective, we felt like we could leverage social, but we never had any Dollar Shave Club videos that blew up or anything. We'd try to create that stuff, but it wouldn't always work. But eventually we found tactics that worked, would repeat them. And then that kind of became strategy. It's almost like a strategy was built out of for working. And you're like, oh, okay, cool. These things are working. Now we've got 3 things to focus on.
Well, you think about that, right? You've been on the journey before. So you've seen larger companies. You've done that early stage. Now you're doing it all over again. And like you said, a lot of strategy, hey, I've tried stuff. It didn't work. So I pivot, I move. How does that impact you when it's number 2? Right? It's your second time around. You know some of these mistakes. You've made some of them before. To some extent, you got to make some of them again, right? But like, how does that impact that early stage growth when you know so much? It's in your head. You've seen the scale, Jim.
I think probably I may not be a good sample study because having come out of a large business, so Vend got fairly large and then I went to Xero and I got really large.
Yeah.
And in a way, it got really hard to make things happen. And so everything required a tremendous amount of planning. Small initiatives take 6 months to do. And so when my co-founder and I started working on Prosaic early last year, it was like catharsis. I was going to do everything. I want the dopamine hit.
Yeah.
Doing something, pushing it out there and seeing a result, whether it's a LinkedIn post or a blog post or shifting something to GitHub. And so I don't know whether that's the roster for me. To do it. I'll do it. This is fun. Wow, look at how fast we can move.
Didn't you set up 40 different email addresses so they probably had an idea? You sent it to those 40 email addresses and waited for it to go around back to you saying yes?
Yeah. I think what you recognize that to do things well, there's a bit of investment you have to do up front, but you recognize that you can fix that stuff later because you have fixed it later on. And so there's possibly a temptation to over-engineer things in the early stages when you go and do it a second time around. You're like, oh, remember that time that we got to that point of scaling where we had to refactor, or we didn't have APIs, or we had to migrate from this sort of small CRM system that was good to start with, and then we had to migrate to a big complex one, and how expensive that was. And in the back of your mind, you're thinking, maybe we should put in Salesforce on day one, and maybe we should really think about the infrastructure and microservices. But you know that if you do that, it'll just be 6 months of backing work that won't actually deliver the result. And
No revenue. Yeah.
you're right. And so I think you're just like, to hell with it. Like our approach is almost like that. There's that famous Airbnb quote where they had this hypothesis that they weren't getting bookings because the photo qualities were really bad. Have you heard about this? And they're like, how do we make good quality photographs? It's going to be really expensive. I don't know. And they just didn't worry how much it costs. Let's just go and test it. They flew to New York, hired a photographer, took a bunch of good photos and put them up next to listings that had bad photos, and the conversion rates were like twice as much. It's okay, we know that works. Now we've got to figure out how to scale it. And we've taken a similar mantra. It says, try things that don't scale, because if it works, we can always scale it later. But if it doesn't work, we haven't spent too much sunk cost trying it out. And so I think we're finding ourselves balancing between just slapping something together and giving it a go versus making small little investments here and there where we're like, okay, let's architect that database in such a way that it doesn't
Get smarter.
not too much, just enough. And we'll review it. We'll say, could theoretically in 5 years, if we have to abstract that and create a set of APIs and microservices, could we undo that decision? We're like, yeah, we can't. Okay, let's just go. So there's a lot of thinking about what are your one-way doors versus two-way doors, to use Los's approach. But you're also like careful not to overthink things and over-engineer things, because you just got to keep moving. You just got to keep trying.
Mate, one thing that you would have obviously picked up being a Vend and Xero is just having your North metric or North Star set out from early on. Is that something you think about as you're going through the startup journey now, or are you still very much, let's get the team up and running, let's get the first 5 or 10 people in the tent? What is the thinking pattern?
Yeah, we're actually just getting into that now. I think to begin with, you're like, we've got this kind of idea that there's a problem or there's a broken workflow that's common to a lot of people, and we think we've got a better way of solving it, but we don't know whether it's unique to us or whether it's really a big thing. And so we're like, let's just put something out there and see what people think about it, see whether the problem resonates with people and whether the way that we solve it can be done by others and gives them the sense that they don't want to go back to doing it the old way. What that kind of, how that represents in terms of leading indicators, North Star metrics, revenue, unit economics. You're like, I didn't know any of that yet. We can figure that out later. We just need to see whether there's a problem and then there's a solution and an audience for it. And so very early on, you're just like, we'll try a bit of that, we'll try a bit of this, and we'll see what happens. And people kind of gravitate towards you. You have enough meetings, you talk to enough customers, you're like, yeah, okay, I can see that this is really common. And I'm asked very specifically, it's a problem that pretty much anyone who's an accountant and is a sole trader or runs a small business and does any work out of their home office or drives their personal vehicle, this is a problem they all have. They all need to claim some of that business, and the current methods for doing it primarily manual. So like, this is a really common problem, but it's not the biggest problem for everybody. And that's not the reason it's probably not been solved in the past, is because it was complicated to do and maybe the effort to solve it wasn't worth it. So we're like, okay, we think there's a problem here. Maybe if we can make it cheap enough to solve and we can make it easy enough to solve, then it goes from being a nice to have to a must have. And so we were spending most of our time just trying to understand was it compelling enough for people to want to use it? Once we started to get early evidence of that, which was people onboarding, people using the product in the way that we thought, and people would even say, okay, we're prepared to pay for that. You're like, okay, cool. This is when people part with money. That for us, that was actually our North Star metric.
Yeah.
All of last year was money. Can we convince somebody to actually give up money for that? You get a lot of false positives in the startup, right? You get a lot of people saying, oh, this is cool. Yeah, I like it. Then they got 100 other things to deal with. And so for us, that first stage was like proving that people will part with money to see the problem go away. But now that we're at that point, we're like, okay, cool. How do we get a lot of people to part with money? And we're thinking about beyond revenue velocity, what is the actual metric of success for us? What shows us that we're solving this problem? And it comes back to the active usage of users for us. If people can connect the bank account, we can find tax deductions for them, or we can complete a claim and then they send it to their accountant. And it took us a long time to figure out, who invites them? Does the user do it? Does the accountant invite them? Do they connect their bank accounts first, or do we get them to give them some There's a lot of different workflows we went through. And earlier this year, we ended up designing a journey almost by accident. And then people started completing it. like accountants would invite their clients would go through, connect their bank accounts, they would do a bit of work, and then they would fire off a claim to their accountant. Then we started to see that behavior repeat, very early days, but enough customers going through that and then say, oh, this is really awesome, that you're like, okay, cool, this is working. Now that's our North Star metric, right? Active users solving the problem and doing it in enough scale to build a meaningful business.
Sometimes I think what you just went through is a good example of the power of it being your second or third or fourth time or having people with experience around you, like understanding how important mapping out customer journeys are and identifying that you've had uptake here and people are following this flow and that flow really works. And then you can double down on that. And they're the things like startups in early stages is all about testing as much as you can, but then identifying that, hey, I've tested stuff, but this actual customer journey is a winner. And then doubling down, I think, is the bit where experience gives you a big advantage over first timers.
Yeah. And I think you just have to realize that it's like disappointing when you design something and you release it and it doesn't work the way you expect. It's a failure. Or when you talk to a customer and they say, oh, this is not really a problem for us. You just have to recognize that's just part of the game. You're going to take a lot of swing and only a few of them are going to land. And then recognizing that the ones that land are the ones that you then continue to focus on. And so I think we're now at the point where we are starting to think about, well, what is a reasonable forecast of growth? What does the kind of funnel look like from decisions to demos to proposals to close to customers onboarding? And when you're working with accountants, it's a fairly long, slow funnel, right? Because you've got to convince them, you've got to convince their team, you've got to convince their first few clients, and then you've eventually got to convince lots of clients. And we still only have the early shoots of that. We have it with enough, we think, customers who are not just friends of ours and clients who've never been about us to be reasonably confident that we're honest.
I love that. Sorry, Keegan.
And we're just like, okay, great. We've got something to hook onto. Let's see how we can optimize that and grow that part of it while we start to think about what's next. Maybe what we do right now isn't enough of a painkiller for all of our users. It's more of a vitamin, but we feel like in that process, we're going to find the painkiller as well. And so I think possibly what's different this time around, and one of the things that I often reflect on, Vend with like an obvious solution to a known problem. Right? With retailers need a point of sale system. Most of them were desktop based and they were looking for something. And if we could provide an offering that was in the cloud and ran off an iPad, it was reasonably easy to meet that need. Whereas what we're designing is an unknown solution to a known problem. And so in some ways we're designing what that solution is as we go, as we learn more about the problem. And there are lots of examples of that. There are software businesses that start with a really kind of common use case, and it's a different way to build a go-to-market, to build marketing tactics versus like Loom is a good example, right? Loom, nobody knew what Loom was until they built it. And they were wildly successful, but suddenly people were doing behaviors in a different way. And they just didn't realize that was a solution to a problem.
Yeah, massive education piece in your go-to-market component, right? You're essentially educating the market that you have this problem and it can be solved. I just want to go, I think there's a lot of power in what you said. The early stage of your founder was all about testing and having a go and taking risks and putting little bits of investments everywhere. And you probably didn't have the same massive spreadsheets that you operated under when you were at Xero or Vend while you were doing that, right? You weren't mapping a funnel and having funnel metrics in there while you were testing every single thing. And then you move into the next phase where you've done a bunch of testing, you've found something that is working, and now you're starting to think about some of those more common metrics that everyone talks about in their podcast and with their companies. And it's very similar to what Ricky and I have been going through as we work with smaller founders. You go into your first meetings and it's always, what metrics do you want from me? What do you want me to build? I'm like, none, because you can't build any of them now because you have no idea what any of these things are yet. And I think that's really important because a lot of people get caught up even early on, I got to have all of this stuff built out and understand it. The fun part of being early stage is you get to have a go at stuff. You get to spend a little bit of investments in different things and take some of those swings that you were talking about without needing to have 200-page spreadsheets that we all advertise.
Look, sometimes it's a little safer to play around with the optimization and the operations. Do you know what I mean? It's like, if I spend a day mucking around in HubSpot and doing these amazing workflows, I feel like I've accomplished something, but like only 3 people use them in a month. That's a complete waste of time, but at least you can control it. In a startup, there's a lot you can't control, and it can be quite nerve-wracking sometimes going into the spaces that you're not comfortable with, picking up the phone, calling a customer, going to a meeting where they reject you, And sometimes it's easier to go back to your comfort zone and
Mhm.
just doing the more kind of operational, strategic stuff rather than the tactical. Like I'm guilty of that too, right? I probably wasted half a day yesterday trying to create a modal window using Help Scout, which is our some onboarding platform. And at the end of it, I was like, was that really good? You tired? Like, I know how to do it. And I think we need it. But if I actually replay my day, I'm like, I probably could have spent a bit of time elsewhere. And so you're constantly challenging yourself on that stuff. But I also think, like, to our kind of point earlier about, I know what marketing automation and a really good customer data platform and BI tools looks like at scale. And I know how you can pull all of that stuff out and make it real time and have board report produce on the fly. And that stuff is important, but when it becomes important, you can
Go
get
to it.
people to do it for you.
Yeah.
But you can
Yeah.
get experts.
Yeah.
And there are some things you can actually just make a whole lot of mistakes and you can rectify it later. There's more of a kind of migrational or operational cost. There's some things that we have done earlier. We put Segment in really early. Segment is a customer data platform. And we pump a bunch of analytics into there and let's just capture it all. I don't know what I want to do with it yet, but at least if we're capturing it, we can use it later on. But when we first put out our beta, it was literally, I think it was a Google form, right? You like register your interest. And then we literally had 40 people sign up. I'm like, how do I actually get into I probably need like an email system. And then I'm like, should I just use MailChimp? I'll just use the free HubSpot. So I sent out free HubSpot with their logo on. I don't care if it's got the HubSpot logo on it, but I know that if it works, then in a year's time, and I want to actually do the paid version of it all in one place. And so there's a lot of just hacking stuff together to get to the point where you then can optimize it later on.
Yeah.
And a little bit of that now, but we're also being careful not to just find ourselves working on things that we can control safer than going and doing the hard stuff.
Yeah.
So Nick, when there's so much coming at you and there's so much on your plate, how do you prioritize? You've just increased your workforce by 50% recently, right?
Yeah.
So when you make that move, how do you determine that I'm going to need this person over that person? Because everything's a fighting priority. That's the hard part in startup, right? Can you spend half a day doing that instead of hiring someone full time? Like, when do you need someone full time? What is going through your head? Because that's probably one of the things that we often speak of is go get a fractional marketer, go get a full-time salesperson, go get 2 devs. But these are the reasons why. I'd love to get into your head and go through your process.
In terms of prioritization, I think so my co-founder, Rowan, he was an early engineer at Vend, and then he went on to work in Slack for about 6 or 7 years, went to the States. And he was there when it was probably about 500 or 600 employees when he joined and many thousands when he left. And so we found the process of starting something from scratch quite cathartic and the speed of just like turning things out. But I think we're at the point now where we're like, actually, we're having to make trade-off decisions and we can't actually build everything as fast as we could when it was very early on. And I think I'm the tip of my own enthusiasm, like all these ideas of stuff we should do. And I just keep sending him Slacks and putting things on Trello and saying, what about try this and we try this? And we still do that. We'll look at an opportunity, we'll break it down and say, what's the absolute minimum we can do? Let's send a webhook into Zapier. If you can do that in 2 hours, then I can muck around and do the rest and keep you focused on the other stuff. And so we're at the point where we're like, I can see that there's a lot to do and we're struggling to keep up with it and possibly need to be a bit more diligent in where we focus. We had a call about it this week, and it's probably just introducing some of those larger business behaviors before that we would have done them in the first time round. And I don't mean like annual planning, but I mean like a weekly whip. For example, where you just say, let's just have a coffee every Monday morning and look at a Trello board of all the stuff we could do and say, here's the 3 things we should do this week, but let's remain open to what might come next. And we'll do that over a 2-week sprint. And it's not a lot of time, effort, investment on your side. It's not a lot of process, but it means that we're on the same page for a couple of weeks. And if I get a crazy idea, I can stop myself before I throw it his way, because I can be like, actually, you know what, I'll put that on the backlog and we can talk about it when we catch up on Friday. And so I think starting to bring in some of that stuff is quite important. I think starting, like you talked about, what are your North Star metrics? What do you actually want to report on? Starting to think beyond 1 week and 2 week cycles and thinking, where do we want to get to in 6 months? And if we get there in 6 months, where could that get us to in a year? And what needs to be true between now and then in terms of customer numbers, conversion rates and revenue? And if we work backwards from that, what are the things that we actually need to prioritize? Do we want to work on a few big bets? Do we want to work on 2 big bets and a couple of small bets? And just having a bit more of a kind of agreed view on what that looks like, which becomes really important when you start to bring team members in, right? Because they want to know what's going on. And I've literally been putting together a whiteboard over the last few weeks where I'm like, customer number, here's some of the milestones you want to do. Here's some of the experiments and tactics we're going to do. Let's agree to focus on a few things, but also do some experiments, but try to give each other the space to actually focus on the stuff once we've agreed what to do. I saw quite a good, actually, as I was going through Miro templates recently, I saw quite a good one. It's called 666, not the devil. It's what do you want to achieve in 6? What are your goals for this next 6 months?
Right.
What are your goals for the next 6 months?
Good framework.
Yeah. What are your goals for the next 6 years? And there are some quite good mental frameworks out there. If you spend a couple of hours as a co-founding team or a small team, just putting this stuff up, you're like, oh, actually, yeah, that's right. That's where we're going. Okay, let's get back to the hustle. So I think in a big company like Xero, you get really good at that. You get very good at reviewing progress, setting goals, assigning projects, you have teams of people whose entire job is to make the work go faster, to make sure that meetings happen on time, that people know what they're working on. And you do learn why that's important to a certain scale. And that is always in the back of my mind, is we may have to get to that at some point. But let's just take some of the good ideas out of that and bring it into our habit early on so that we do scale a little bit more organically. And so that's like first kind of answer around prioritization. In terms of hiring, I guess before you start adding people, you probably need to know that stuff.
Yeah.
Right. And you can hire based on where you're busy. Oh, we're busy. We need support. We're busy. We need engineers. There's too much to do. But if you don't actually know where you're going or where you want to be in 6 months or a year, you might just hire to fill all the gaps and you just stay busy, but you end up going nowhere. And so for us, it was a really good exercise. And towards the end of last year, I did just think about what could it look like in a year if growth numbers followed typical trajectories. What are the things we'd have to work on? If we want to raise, how much would we need? And what story would we tell? And for me, it was quite a good exercise to just probably get a bit clearer in my mind that this is a real thing and start to talk about that story externally. And then as part of that, I'm like, what would we spend money on? What would we hire? And so it was like,
You're back.
I'm back. Did you leave me for a bit?
Just for a second. Yeah. You said real thing and then you paused.
Yeah. So it was like,
And
okay,
then it
right.
was like this.
Imagining a forecast, right? Which is, you have no idea whether it's going to be true, but you could probably write one based on, get GPT to write, based on what a SaaS company would look like in its first 2 years. And then thinking of, like, plugging what we know now into that, what could we look like in a year? And could we bootstrap or would we need to raise? And if we had to grow, where would we spend it? And so I think that was probably one of the benefits of having been through a large business, is now thinking, okay, let's be a little bit more intentional about the next couple of years, which means that we can think about where we hire rather than just hire based on how busy you are, what kind of most immediate priority is.
Mate, the other thing, I assume, you may correct me here, having been part of something that's scaled like Vend and Xero, culture plays such a big part. We learned this firsthand, obviously, at Simpro. How much of that are you now orchestrating or engineering as you then looking at 6 months, 12 months down the track? Obviously, you and your co-founder must have mutual values, the reason why you guys got together in the first place. But as you bring in external hires, what are you looking for beyond just those skill sets that you're acquiring?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I touched on it a bit before about this idea of envisioning your business in the future. And I'm fortunate that I do some work for New Zealand Trade and Enterprise, where whenever I was at Vend or Xero, I really enjoyed meeting early stage businesses. So fortunate, I do a bit of work for New Zealand Trade and Enterprise as a beachheads advisor. And it was something I started doing when I finished up with Xero. I always enjoyed meeting early stage startups and offering them advice or counsel on just like learning about what they're doing. And I was really motivated to do that. When I was in the early stage at Vend, I just was desperate to pick the brains of anybody who'd been there and done that before. And when people started asking me for my opinions, it was quite humbling. And I just felt like I wanted to pay it back. But it's hard to find the time to do that when you're in a full-time job. So I started going with the New Zealand Trade and Enterprise. And oftentimes it is just pattern recognition and helping founders and early teams step outside themselves and say things like, imagine yourself in 3 years. What does your company look like? What are the kind of roles? If your revenue's 5 times as much, what kind of roles might you need? What might your sales team look like, your marketing team, finance team? And even just like draw a hypothetical org chart and then come back to your next 3 hires and say, actually, what are the most important hires to make now? Is it a VP sales or is it a young salesperson who can move into a manager, but may eventually need to have a VP above them? And therefore you can be really intentional about our next hire. But you can also set the right expectations with those hires, both in terms of culture, how the organization is going to grow and scale, and what it means for them on that journey. Joining an early stage startup can be the most incredible way to accelerate your career. In 3 years, you can do what some people don't achieve in 30. But it's also, you got to hang on and you got to live up and you got to continue to level up. And I was fortunate at Vend that I think I was able to do that. At least I managed to go from the only sort of marketing person to the CMO, but not everybody's up to that task and not everybody wants it either. And so when you hire people in an early stage startup, it's always good to set expectations that you're the first marketing person, but that doesn't make you the CMO in 3 years. It's an opportunity for you to go after it, but we might get to a position where we need different skill sets. And that's true of the founders as well. Yeah, we might need a proper CEO or we might need a proper CTO. And so I think setting those expectations early on is something that I learned from having gone through it. And that's something that's very much on the mind of myself and Rowan. In terms of culture, it's interesting. I don't know. Maybe because of the hype of the last few years and the zero interest rate startup phenomenon or watching We Crashed or too much Silicon Valley, a little part of me is feeling like having a culture which isn't like classic startup, pool tables and ping pong and lots of t-shirts and conferences would wrap our enterprise product. And so there's a little part of us, I think we want to be quite subdued in our culture. And that's probably true of myself and my co-founder, and almost not express it in terms of values and not really be outward about our brand. Prosaic as a term just means ordinary. And we didn't choose it because of that. But quite like the idea of the brand not being the thing. The customer is the thing and the problem is the thing and the product is the thing and the brand. We're just here to make shit happen and to solve a problem, not to create a movement. And there's a little part of me that's on the fence about how that represents itself in terms of our culture. And do we have culture values? Do we represent it in the same way I've done in previous companies? Because I know it works really well. It's really important.
Mate, you just have one, like you said, we're here to make shit happen. Done. Yeah, there it is. Whack it on the wall, you're solved. Exactly.
And I think that there are themes coming through where I'm like, no, this probably is our culture. Do things that don't scale. This is something we talk about quite a lot. So I would think just get it done and then we can always fix it up later. And I can already feel the beginnings of what is our culture starting to emerge, even if we haven't written it down and talked about it. I think the most important thing you can do before you document that, before you think about how you train your new staff about what your culture is just hire people that align with it. Look for the right talent, look for the right people who, not just like cultural monoculture, you want diversity, you want different perspectives, you want different experience, but people who represent it in ways that you don't often know that it exists. Because when you're founders, you're just so busy getting things done, you don't necessarily realize the culture you're building. But when you hire people, they start to replay it back to you. And so I think it's really important who you hire, the kind of values they bring, the attitudes and everything else. And that kind of becomes your culture if you hire well.
One more question from my side. I'm a big believer that software companies in particular, but all businesses are really just about the people. People you have, because they're the ones who build your product, who sell your product, who support your customers, who do all the things your company actually needs to do. And one of the hardest things about startups and early stage startups is you don't have anything to help you decide if that is the right person for you to bring into your company. Are they actually going to be a good salesperson, sales leader, CEO, developer, whatever it is? One of the advantages of having done it before is you know a whole bunch of people who you've seen do roles who you know, so you know what good is, or you actually know someone who is good. In the stage you're at, is it something where you're looking at talent you already know and looking at, hey, I can bring them in soon? Or are you more, I can bring in younger people, I'm just going to go hire what I can get and train them up?
Bit of both. Yeah, 100%. My wife works in film and television and she often uses the example of directors or filmmakers, right? Martin Scorsese, he's got a crew that he always goes with, his DOP, his script writer. And so the reason they make such great films is because they've got their crew of talent and they can build really great stuff. And I think it's very true in startups as well, because the nature of them starting, forming, growing. And then there's a really good base of talent now in New Zealand, which didn't exist 15 years ago when we were early on at Vend. And a lot of those folks that started as product managers and became VPs of product are now thinking about doing their own startups. Some of the founders have exited and they're reinvesting in those next stage of startups. I think we've possibly got a few more cycles to go before it's at the level of somewhere like Silicon Valley, but it's a really good time to be starting a business. It's always a terrible time, right? 2008, when Xero started, GFC, and we're right in the middle of a pretty tough economic time. But from a talent perspective, this is a really good time. There's a lot of really great people out there with a lot of experience. There's definitely part of my motivation is probably just like getting the band back together. I do like the idea of having some of those people that I've worked with over the years, the opportunity to work with them again, because we just had such good times. We achieved so much stuff. They've gone on to learn amazing things, but you just can't do it all at once. And a lot of those folks now are very highly paid and their own startups as well. And so I think from the beginning, we've thought about this. I'll give you one example. Francois Bondeguer he was like one of my first marketing hires at Vend. He came as a digital marketer and he built up our SEO and SEM stack. He's a creative French genius who was really responsible for a large part of Vend's success in terms of driving digital acquisition. He then joined me at Xero for a little bit, went to deputy, but he is now at Canada leading their B2B marketing and leading a huge team with pipeline targets in the tens of millions. But very early on, I was just like picking his brains on stuff. I'm like, can I just get you for an hour a week? Just help us? Yeah, exactly. And we didn't even have an ESOP scheme at the time. And I'm just like, here's a sort of simple agreement. Let's just get you on as an advisor. And he's not even been doing digital marketing, but he's just keeping us really honest and keeping us focused on the right things. And it's just fantastic for the opportunity to work together again. Whether we can hire him down the track or not, like that's been a really rewarding part of the journey. We were constrained in terms of engineering capacity, a lot of really great engineers, but they're all earning a lot of money. And so we did get some early on to help us with a few projects here and there, evenings and weekends. The kind of guys that 3 hours can turn out the equivalent of a standard engineer for 40 hours of work. Yeah. And so we've been able to get a pretty interesting cabal of people, but we've also, our first true hire, a sales rep, Johan, I worked with him at Xero, but our paths never really crossed, but he was working closely with another chap at Xero called Hayden, who was advising us for a little bit last year. And I said, I think we need a kind of sales rep. We don't need a sales manager yet. We need somebody that's experienced but up and coming. He said, Click, this guy is amazing. We had a couple of coffees. I'm like, can you come and do 6 months? It's just like, there's a lot of risk. Would love to try things out. And so then he's only been there 3 weeks, but he'd reworked the HubSpot pipeline by the end of day 2. And on day 3, he hit the phones and he was booking demos. And this is exactly what we want. Right. And so
that's the advantage, right? Like you wanted to work with him, but you knew somebody who you knew what good looked like. You knew what you needed to ask the right person. That person can connect you to something. It's not a CCAD that you whacked out there and you got 50 candidates and you went and talked to 50 candidates and you went, gee, and they all interviewed really well. These 3 are the best interviewers. I didn't pick this one. You came through a pipeline that it's warm, very warm, right? When you hire.
You're right. And so you have a better sense of what good looks like, what you want to hire for, where you want to spend your money, and then you know how to work out whether somebody's good really quickly. But we're still looking on the engineering side. We did put up posts. We had a huge pipeline of candidates, but we're possibly a little bit too early for a full-time engineer who's in a pretty well-paid job. There's a bit of risk there. And so we're still going to have to do more classic recruitment for sure.
Oh, of course. Yeah.
But I think you're right. Your ability to find talent and know what they should look like early on.
Yeah.
But it's pretty neat being able to work with people that you've known already and finding new talented people who are looking to make the mark.
I just want to change the subject here a little bit. Social media, how much of that is playing a part in what you're building? The reason I ask, we never heavily invested in for a number of reasons, right? That wasn't our audience base. We are now a little bit just because we got maybe time. It's something I want to spend my time in. But for you, as you're building out your startup, is that something you're being intentional with, or is that just coming with you because of everything you've done in the past?
I've probably been quite thoughtful about where we do it. It has evolved so much in the last 10 years. Like social media at Vend was never really an acquisition channel for us. I always hoped it would be, but I think search was just too good. And then people would find us through their account or through the different channels we were in, like the Shopify app store. But we never really had viral success on Twitter or Facebook or
Yeah.
anything like that. And to a lesser extent, they were able to build pretty good communities online. But when we started Prosaic, we, like many things, a website and a domain name, but I'm not really sure where we're going to put it. And there, for the last year, I think many people would agree, that LinkedIn went from being a place where I would like randomly check messages every 3 months and then just apologize for not getting back to people. But in the last year or so, it seems to be, I guess people are a little bit tired of X or Twitter and Facebook's just like content spam now. Although there is a reasonable amount of content spam on LinkedIn and certainly a growing trend for selfie profile photos with, what do they call it, where you just stack your content like that. But there's a good audience on there. There's good engagement from a business to business perspective. It's worked pretty well. And so when we put out a prototype of our product, I just put out a LinkedIn post and I got 10,000 shares and we had 30 people sign up off of one post. I was like, oh, this is cool. This actually seems to work as a channel for us. And that may be because it was where our audience was. Like our product works for anybody that kind of is a contractor or a small business, and a lot of accounts from there. So for professional services, it's quite good. It might have been because I had my profile had built up over the last few years. Like when I was at Xero, there was quite a lot of work in building the profile and putting out content that would get you reach. And so I think some of the founder profile help, which is again a bit of an unfair advantage when you're starting second time around. But we haven't gone on X. I don't really see any need for it. I created a Facebook page just so I could test with some Facebook and Instagram. And yeah. 2 likes. I think I'll probably share.
Yeah.
And the Facebook ads weren't very good. They weren't very successful. And so I think, yeah, we're being intentional. We are probably focusing more on LinkedIn. I feel like any channel, there's always a risk that you get a sort of golden age before it becomes too cluttered. But right now, it's a pretty good place to reach potential customers, particularly our customers who then want to tell their accountant about it. Seems to be a pretty good channel. But you can't be selling on there. You have to be thoughtful about what you put out. And so I think when we think about taking a product to market, I think that's going to play a pretty important role. Selling is a really important part of taking our product to market. It's a pretty consultative process and you can find your ICP fairly quickly if you're selling directly to accountants, but it can be relatively slow. And that's actually something I'd always long for at Vend. When you talk about what are your most important things, like what are you doing as a founder? Like selling is really everything, but you're always selling it. You're always thinking about who your customer is, evangelizing it. And it's hard work because you believe in it and you really care about it, but you're going to take a lot of rejection. And though it puts me outside of my comfort zone. But when we were at Vend, we were very good at inbound marketing. We were very good at attracting demand. And the sales process there was much more about converting, more like customer success. But early on in what we're doing, I found I could message a few people on LinkedIn and get a demo where you get people excited, like completely cold. And for me, it was really exciting because you can build like reasonably predictable go-to-market motions around that. If you can predict what a salesperson costs and what the pipeline and the area will look like. And then you can complement that with marketing, whether it's events, online activity, content, so forth. And so I'm quite excited about the potential of that, but it's still early on. I don't think we've worked out what our average quota carry is and what our
you work it out, mate. Given the fact you're trying different channels, you got to work it out.
Double it.
Yeah, exactly. Hey, last one from me. We've talked about looking into the future. So for you now manifesting and going, when I hang up my boots, what do I want to be remembered for? What would that be?
Well, you know, honest, I probably already remembered for the few albums that we released as a band. It's like, that shit nailed. And Randy's a movie director, and one day I'm going to play a couple of songs with them, and one in the movie. But yeah, maybe when I'm done with startups, I'll go back on the road with the band. What do I want to be remembered for? I don't know. I think I just like solving problems, and I enjoy the most satisfying thing I think about this early stage of a startup is seeing behavior change in a positive way, seeing the impact of what you do. And even if it's only a couple of hours you give somebody back, seeing them like go, wow. Like I was on a call with a client recently who got stuck connecting their bank account. So I just talked her through it and she went, I could see her eyes light up. She's like, I didn't know it was going to be that easy. I was like, that is really cool because you've effectively, you've reached them and you've changed something in their life in a small way. And weirdly enough, that's all I wanted to play music for. I wanted to get in a band, get in a room with a bunch of people, create some songs, put it out there and have an impact on a large number of people. And the problem with music is that nobody wanted to buy CDs anymore. But I found it early on at Vend. It was the same. It was a weird analogy. Like being in a startup, it's very similar. You get a few people in a room, you rally around a vision, you work really hard, you put it out there, and then people latch onto it and you reach an audience. And when we started opening offices and going over, I couldn't believe that I was being flown to London to put on an event for customers. It's like a dream. I even got to walk out on stage at XeroCon, one of the keynotes in front of 3,000 accountants. Nice. I wonder.
Just bring your guitar.
You should have brought the dance together as your keynote spins and just played a song.
Thank you, Xero.
Thank you, Xero. Yeah.
And they walked down to business time by the flight of the concourse, but I don't think anybody got it.
I would have gone. That's funny.
I'll take this. It's just fun. I like it. The ability to impact a large number of people with some crazy idea. And so I guess if what we create, whether it's through Vend or what we did at Xero or what we're doing now in Prosaic, becomes an idea that has an impact on large numbers of people and I remember for that, then that's probably, I'll tick that off the list.
It's as good as it. Nice. Right. Love it. Hey, mate, we'll take you through a quick fire round. These are meant to be easy. And we'll try and corner you so they are easy.
You can pick one thing per thing. It's like one. There's
Just
not
one,
multiple choice, it's one.
I know. I've been too lenient in the past, but Sean holds me pretty well to that. So let's kick off with the first one. Favorite sport?
Surfing.
Oh, yeah, of course.
I'm terrible at it. I'm not good at it. I'm a late life surfer. But yeah, if there's one thing I think about that I want to do more than I get to, it's surfing.
I think, especially with the Aussie crowd, this will go well. Favorite movie of all time?
Big Lebowski.
Oh, quick.
That's the first.
I've never seen that.
It's good movie.
Yeah. It's, if I'm ever flick between channels anymore, but back when you're there, if it's never on, I'd be stuck watching, even if it was like 4, 5, 6 times.
Nice. And what about on Friday it doesn't have to be Friday, but favorite drink? What are you leaning towards?
He's having one right now.
Cocktail? Is it a beer? Is it a wine? Is it
I sort of thought of it.
None of that green.
Whiskey sour. I'm like,
Whiskey sour.
Just beer, honestly. That's the thing that brings me the most joy.
Yeah, beer. Me too. Nothing fancy. Beer.
It's fine.
Good, man.
I also send the glass back when they bring it out. I'm like, I don't need a glass. I need a can spot.
Straight out of bottle. Favorite place to visit? Holiday. Not necessarily.
Waipu in Northland. It's down. We were fortunate enough to get a bit of land up there and build a small house on it. So if I'm ever away from there for too long, I start imagining being out there surfing first thing in the morning. And
awesome.
Yeah.
Happy place.
Like it.
Mate, this is the main one. This is the only reason we thought of starting this podcast.
It is.
It was to try and work out people who would like us. So if you were a Waipu, this is going to be your last meal. You were given 2 jars. One said crunchy, the other one said smooth. Both peanut butter. Which one are you picking? You're only allowed to pick one.
I'm going to go in the cupboard and get the extra crunchy.
Yes, good.
Yeah.
That is the only acceptable
one of that.
That's only acceptable third answer, right?
That's double. Like the respect's just double.
Yeah.
Double.
100%.
Awesome.
I do not understand smooth.
That's why we started this podcast to try to figure it out. Like, why do people pick smooth and what's wrong with it?
That's why we recorded 200 episodes, only released about 60 because the other ones were smooth.
Right, that was the last thing up front. We could have saved a whole lot of problems.
Awesome, mate. Thanks for coming on. Thanks for giving up your time and thanks for sharing your story and wish you all the very best with what's to come at Prosaic.
Thanks for hosting. Yeah, great.
Appreciate it.